I'm now joined by Dan Feferman, National Security Analyst and editor of Middle East 24. Dan, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you on. Israel is preparing to open the key border crossing to let Gazans travel into Egypt. Why has Israel made this decision now?
According to the terms of the 20-point Trump plan, which we've not seen in its entirety, but we know the more or less the points of it, Israel was supposed to open the Rafah Crossing. This is a crossing that previous to this war, Israel had not controlled this. This was managed between the Egyptians and the Palestinian Authority. But of course, throughout the course of this war, Israel took control of Rafah, a key arms smuggling point between Egypt and Gaza. And as mentioned in your report, with the exception of a few months window between January and May, this has been closed again to try to restrict the exit of Hamas fighters, the entrance of arms into Gaza. The issue is that while all the living hostages have been returned to Israel, there are still the remains, the bodies of two deceased hostages who have yet to be returned to Israel. There is some pressure on Israel there to try to move along the ceasefire deal. And so Israel has agreed to open it for the exit of Gazans. Specifically, there are some estimated to be some 16,000 sick or wounded Gazans who require treatment outside of medical treatment outside of Gaza. And it is not yet agreeing, Israel is not yet agreeing to open the crossing for the re-entry of Palestinians, according to the plan, until the Hamas or Islamic Jihad return the remaining two bodies of hostages that they still hold.
So, Dan, as you said to me, Israel is moving forward with the ceasefire despite those remains being returned to Israel and not being the hostages themselves, but they are under pressure. Things are moving forward. And when we talk about this Rafah crossing and people getting out, and you mentioned there it will be people who need hospital treatment, who've been wounded or are severely sick, but will it also allow the flow of aid into Gaza? Because there's been a lot of criticism that Israel has not let in the amount of aid trucks that were agreed in that ceasefire agreement.
Well, again, we're waiting here for Hamas to uphold its end of the agreement. It dragged out the return of the living hostages by more time than was expected. It definitely dragged out the return of the deceased hostages. Until now, they have still not been returned, and it's been a number of months. And so there is an attempt, kind of a carrot and a stick approach here by Israel to try to bring about more, cooperation from the Palestinian side of the ceasefire. Of course, aid has been flowing in. The UN itself, certainly no fan of Israel, not one to withhold criticism, has mentioned that more aid, than is necessary for months at a time has flown in. So that doesn't seem to be an issue. And I'm not aware of Israel withholding any humanitarian or food aid from going into the Strip.
I have spoken to some people on the show who are humanitarian workers, and they have said to me there's not nearly enough coming in, but we won't focus on that right now. Dan, what I want to ask you is who is going to control and provide security for the Gazans using the Rafah crossing, and how safe will it be for those wishing to leave the Strip? Because since the ceasefire did take effect, Israeli attacks have killed at least 360 Palestinians and injured 922, and Israel has violated the ceasefire agreement at least 591 times from the 10th of October to the 2nd of December. We are getting these figures from the government media office in Gaza, but I just want to ask you, how safe will people be and who will be controlling this?
Well, I want to push back on your characterization of Israel seemingly waking up out of the blue and violating a ceasefire. These are military reactions to Hamas violations of the ceasefire. Whether it's planned by Hamas or not, that's something that we can discuss, and I don't actually quite know the answer to that. What we do know is that a number of Hamas fighters, whether under orders or acting on their own, whether they got the memo, so to speak, or not, attacked Israeli troops on the Israeli side of the ceasefire line. And so Israel has responded to such violations by Hamas. The area around the Rafah border crossing is under Israeli control, is not under Hamas control. From what I understand, it will be a Palestinian Authority managed by an EU commission, an EU delegation mechanism, and of course Egypt on the other side. So it's very hard for me to see that this would be unsafe for Gazans, for Palestinians wishing to safely exit the Strip into Egypt. Of course, this still requires the Egyptians to agree to want to allow Gazans into their territory, something they have been very hesitant to do throughout the entire 2 years of this war. And so we're still waiting to see the details of what this will look like, and it's supposed to come into effect, if approved by the various sides, within the coming days.
Dan, just another quick question for you on a different topic. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition is divided over the ultra-Orthodox conscription bill. How much a risk does this actually pose to Netanyahu's leadership in Israel and the coalition?
You know, he's managed to survive a number of different attempts to unseat him. Here we see an attempt. This is a consistently divisive issue in Israeli society. This is something that it is able to get hundreds of thousands of people in the streets on either side of this issue. And he has, in the last years, in the number of prime ministerial terms that he's had, managed to coalesce the two ultra-Orthodox parties around him. And of course, the promise is to continue to push for very lax laws on their engagement into the military, something which is incredibly frustrating for the rest of Israeli society, especially after these last 2 years of what Israelis see as an existential war. He's going to have to fight an uphill battle to try to convince the rest of the Israeli public who does serve in the army that this is somehow in their interest. But of course, I've learned to never count out Netanyahu when an election is on the line. You know, what was the saying? No eternal friendships, only interests. And so he knows how to maneuver the political camps very much in his favor. He knows how to make promises and pushing off the payment of those promises as much as possible, certainly to keep his coalition in order and to keep himself in the prime ministerial seat.
Dan Feferman, great analysis there on Netanyahu staying in power. Thank you for joining me.